this is lesson 11.1 in our Go Math series. We're going to be looking at three-dimensional figures and their nets. So our first question is, what is a solid figure? So a solid figure is a three-dimensional figure because it has three dimensions: length, width, and height. Just like when you go to a 3D movie, it kind of projects out. When you have that third dimension, you get more depth. When we think of 2D, you think of like, a sheet of paper has length and width, but it doesn't have the height. Solid figures can be identified by the shapes of their bases, the number of bases, and the shapes of their lateral faces. So right here, speaking of lateral faces, your lateral faces are these rectangular sides. There's three lateral faces. You've got this rectangle here, you've got a rectangle here in the front, and then another one in the back. And the bases of this one is the triangle on top and also the triangle on bottom. So when we name our prisms, we name them according to what shape the base is. So in this case, our base was a triangle, so this is a triangular prism. And the sides of a prism will always be rectangle, or the lateral faces, of a prism are always going to be rectangles. Alright, so for our first example, we're going to identify the solid figure here. So I was trying to kind of give you an idea of how this would look. So notice on the top and the bottom we have rectangles, although you can't see that. This is a cereal box, so you can visualize the top of it being a rectangle, and then the bottom's also a rectangle. So the first question asks, is the cereal box a prism? And the answer would be, yes, it's a prism. We have the three dimensions, we have two bases, and we have our lateral faces. The next question says, what shape are the bases? So if we look at the bases, those are rectangles. So that means that this would be a rectangular prism. So remember, prisms are going to have the two bases that are the same, and it's going to have lateral faces, at least three lateral faces. Alright, so now they want us to draw a net for our rectangular prism. So a net is a two-dimensional figure that can be folded into a solid figure. So in this case, if we were to take this cereal box and cut it so we could lay it flat, this is one way we might see it. Both the top and the bottom would be rectangles. Our left and right faces, which would be this side here and the other side, so these smaller rectangles, but they're also rectangles. I'm going to go ahead and do this. So this was the top. I'm going to put T for top, B for bottom. I'm going to put R for right. And if we folded this around, that would mean this one would be the left, like if we went around that way. So this would be your front, and this would be your back. So notice all of our shapes, though, are rectangles. So, which, they've already given us one possibility for what our rectangular prism could possibly look like. Okay, so we're talking about prisms, solid figures that are prisms, but we're also going to talk about solid figures that are pyramids. So a pyramid is also a solid figure, and it has a polygon-sized base and triangles for lateral faces. So with a prism, we had rectangles for your faces, your lateral faces. But for a pyramid, we have triangles for our lateral faces. Now notice it did say that it's a polygon-shaped base. So the type of pyramid you're looking at would depend on what that base is. And the ones that we're going to be looking at are square pyramids, rectangular pyramids, and triangular pyramids. So a pyramid with a rectangle for a base is called a rectangular pyramid. So again, the base is right here. Notice though, what's different about another thing that's different about prisms and pyramids, other than the fact that the lateral faces are triangles instead of rectangles, is that we only have one base instead of two, because a pyramid will come to a point. Alright, so for this example, we're going to identify and we're going to draw a net for the solid figure. So if we're looking at this, here's our point, which means this down here is our base. And we can see that our base is in the shape of a triangle. So the base is a triangle. Alright, and then if we look at our lateral faces, we can tell that our lateral faces are also triangles. Okay, so since we have a base as a triangle and we have triangles as our lateral faces, then this must be a triangular pyramid. So now we've got to draw our net. So now we had one triangular base, so we need one triangle for our base, and then we have one for this right side, one for this back side, and one for this side. One way you know how many triangles you need for your faces is by counting the sides of the base. So if we counted the side of our base, there's 1, 2, 3. So the way I'm going to draw this, and there's different ways you can draw nets. Alright, so I'm going to start with a triangle in the middle. This is just the easiest way for me to do it. Then I'm going to draw triangles off to each side. And it's not the prettiest picture, but you get the idea of what the net would look like. Alright, in example 2, we're going to identify and sketch the solid figure. So this time they're giving me my net, so I'm going to draw the solid figure. So what we notice here is we have 2 triangles and we have 3 rectangles. So we have 2 triangles. So it's not going to be a pyramid, because a pyramid would have at least 4 triangles in it. So that means that the triangles must be the bases for what shape. If this is not a pyramid and it's got triangles, then what would it be? Alright, so if you said it's a triangular prism, you're correct. So this is a triangular prism. And again, we're going to have to draw it. So for me, the easiest way to draw it is to start with a triangle here and then kind of go over a little bit. See how I kind of drew that over and higher? I'm going to connect the tops. I'm going to connect the left. I'm doing a dotted line here. And then I'm going to connect that right there. So there we have our triangular prism. So in the next example, we're going to identify and draw a net for the solid figure here. So notice how it comes to a point, which means we're dealing with a pyramid, and most of you can look at that and tell me it's a pyramid. So the base, though, of this pyramid is it appears to be a square, so we're going to call it a square. And our lateral faces are all triangles. So that makes this a square pyramid. Alright, so what shape does this solid figure appear to be made up of? If you look at every side, what shape does it appear to be? If you said each side, each lateral face, each base looks like a square, then you would be correct. So when we have this figure right here, we call this a cube. So this is a cube. So we've got to draw the net for the cube. Now, there's many different ways to draw the net, but typically the easiest, and the way I typically do it, is just to make a cross. You could also do a capital T, lowercase t, however you want to call it. This could be a lowercase t, or you could do an uppercase. But that's usually the way I show it. Just make sure that you're able to identify. Make sure, you have to imagine yourself folding it up and making sure nothing overlaps. Like if this was the left side, or the right side, this is the left side, and you fold this over, it's going to make a box. It's going to close it in. But if I had had two on this side instead of one on each side, that wouldn't have folded. It wouldn't have worked. So you just have to kind of imagine that. And if we were in our regular classroom, this would be a time that we'd get a chance to play with some of these nets a little bit more. So I'm sorry that we don't have the opportunity. But there's all kinds of resources online. You can look up nets, and sometimes you can find things to print out, and you can play with the nets yourself and make those prisms and pyramids. Alright, so looking at number 3 and 4, we're going to identify and sketch the solid figure that can be formed. So looking at this, here we have the net, and we've got to figure out what our net's for. So notice we have 1, 2, 3, 4 triangles. So we know that our base is a triangle. We also know that that base is going to have 3 lateral faces because there's 3 sides in a triangle. Now the question is, does that give us enough triangles for it to be a prism? For one, a prism has to have rectangles, so that's not going to work, right? This is only triangles, so we're dealing with a pyramid. But we have to be more specific than that. What kind of pyramid? Well, again, we look at this and all we see is triangles, so this would be a triangular pyramid. And this one's kind of tricky to draw. So I'm going to draw kind of a bigger triangle. And then right here, I'm going to put a little dot. And then I'm going to draw my dotted line from this vertex to that dot. And then from this one. And then straight up. And then you can kind of see how this would be a triangular pyramid. Alright, so on this one, notice I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 squares. So what shape would that make? If I have 6 squares, I have a cube. So this was another net for a cube. Now to draw the cube, I typically draw it like this. And then you connect the same vertex with each of those 2D figures to make the 3D figure. Moving on to number 5. So we're identifying and drawing a net for this solid figure. So we have 2 triangular bases and 3 lateral faces that are rectangles. So that makes this a triangular. Gotta make sure I'm spelling it right. Every now and then I have to check myself. Triangular prism. Not a pyramid. It doesn't come to a point, and it has 2 triangles, makes it a prism. So now I need to draw a net. So I'm just going to go ahead and draw 3 rectangles. And I'm going to put triangles at the end of one of those rectangles. Okay, so next on this one, it appears that we have 2 squares and 4 rectangles. Now, since we are dealing with a square, but they usually don't say square prism, they just go ahead and call it a rectangular prism. Alright, so to draw this, I'm going to do it kind of like I did this one. I'm going to go ahead and draw the rectangles. And they're all the same size if you can draw them to scale. But if you can't, don't worry about it. It's not going to be a grade or anything on how you're drawing. Alright, so this time I chose to go with a capital T look. A very stretched out capital T. So hopefully that helps you understand a little more about 3-dimensional figures and nets. We'll be using this more when we get into surface area.